Good morning. I'm Dave Rubin. I'm a geriatrician based at UCLA, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm just thinking if I weren't here, I would just be sleeping. So thank you. I think we have a very stimulating day, and I'm going to keep my remarks very brief right now. But I would like to say that I am a geriatrician. And a good bit of my life is spent taking care of old people. My youngest is in her late 60s, and my oldest is almost 101. And most of my patients are in their 80s or older. And I'd just like to tell you about 4 of my patients very briefly. This shouldn't take more than an hour or two. The first is an 86-year-old man who's an architect and is kind of internationally renowned, who is jet-setting around the world, and I can't keep up with the guy because he's all over the place, and still incredibly productive and just kind of thinking about the next big job. The second is an 87-year-old patient of mine who was a television director and directed a lot of the sitcoms that I grew up with in the 50s and 60s. And he is now writing plays and going to the actors' workshop and places like that to get them read and such like that. The actor's gym is what he calls it. The third is a woman who is 92 years old, and she's about yay big. She has shrunk considerably, and she's very interesting. She is an artist that has been active all of her life, and she works in big sculptures. That's her big thing, big sculptures. And she does these little mock-ups, and they have these fabricators that make them life-size and bigger. And she is still working. Despite a number of hospitalizations recently, she's still working. And the fourth is a 94-year-old man. I just went to his birthday party, who was a musician all of his life. He went to Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, and a classmate of his a couple years ahead of him was Leonard Bernstein. And he still remembers when Leopold Stokowski asked him to come to New York, and he said he didn't want to leave Los Angeles. And this guy, very interesting fellow, is a violinist, became concertmaster for the Hollywood Bowl, and played on just about every record that you grew up with. He worked with everybody from Frank Sinatra to Donna Summer. And about a year and a half ago, he asked me if I would write some words for some music that he was writing. And so here he is. He's 94 years old, and he's still very active. So what is it about these 4 patients of mine? And are these just exceptional people? And I would say as a geriatrician that all of my patients are exceptional, but in fact these are folks who are in very late years and are still quite active, and the thing that they have in common is they're artists, and they're really committed to their art, and they're very engaged at this point. So these are anecdotes. This is not science, and the question before us today. Is there science behind this, or are we dealing with just exceptional people who defy the odds? And today we're going to really begin to look at that, kind of what the evidence base is, and what is missing. What more do we need to know? Is art the fountain of youth? The one thing that we were talking about this yesterday and reading over the papers. The one thing that's great about art and engagement in arts is there's virtually no side effects. It's really great. It's not like some of these medicines we give people. And so what is the potential for this, and how can we exploit the potential to its benefit? We have a wonderful group of people who are going to be speaking today, and hopefully we'll be raising more questions maybe than answering them. But the idea is how to go forward towards answering them, so that when I'm in my 80s and 90s, I know it's best to keep me young. I'm going to turn over the comments to Connie Citro, who is here representing the Committee on National Statistics, which is the host of this conference, and she'll say a few words about the National Academy's involvement.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here to welcome you all at the National Academy's Keck Center to this workshop with this long but very important title of Research Gaps and Opportunities for Exploring the Relationship of the Arts to Health and Well-Being in Older Adults. You're going to be hearing from the National Institutes of Health and the National Endowment for the Arts, who collectively, several institutes and centers and offices in NIH came together with NEA to talk to the Academy about putting on this event. The Committee on National Statistics, which I direct, is a standing unit at the National Academy of Sciences. It was set up in 1972 when a presidential commission on federal statistics said we have the most decentralized statistical and also research operation in the world. And this has many, many benefits. There are lots of innovations and innovative ideas that come from it, but it can make it sometimes difficult to coordinate efforts. And so our committee was set up to be a body that could endeavor to help the statistical and research communities use state-of-the-art methods and coordinate some of their activities, and we try to do that to the best of our ability. There are about 60 different units like this in the Academy. They have names like the Food and Nutrition Board and the Army Research Science Board and Committee on Population. And they consist of usually a dozen to 15 volunteers or pro bono academics, mostly, some people from industry, some people from government, who oversee a portfolio of work in a particular subject area. Committee on National Statistics is a broad title, and we do cover many, many, many topics ranging from undercount in the decennial census to improving the measures of our economy. We have a project right now funded by the National Institute on Aging, which is relevant to this workshop. It's about measuring subjective, or what a better term is, self-reported well-being. Such measures are gaining ground in many countries. The Office for National Statistics in the United Kingdom is got such measures on its regular surveys, and they are being used by the government as a way to monitor the state of the health of society, in addition to the usual gross domestic product and so on. There's a lot of research in back of this, and a lot of some statistical activity, not actual questions in our official statistics, but things like the American Time Use Survey, which is a federal survey which measures the time that people devote to different activities. These are relevant, I think, to this workshop. The Time Use Survey and other studies is one way of seeing how many people are actually spending time on the arts as well as other activities, and some of the well-being measures are trying to capture, well, when you were doing such and such, how were you feeling? How were you feeling about it? So we do have a portfolio that is relevant to this project. But I am delighted that we were asked to do this particular workshop to get directly at what do we know, what do we need to know about how the arts relates to health and well-being in older adults. Let me just say just a word about the National Academy of Sciences itself, under which our Committee on National Statistics and other units operate. The Academy itself is a body, an honorary, self-perpetuating, independent 501c3 nonprofit organization with every year about 70 of the nation's top scientists are elected to membership. The reason we have an advisory role to the government, which is actually quite unique among in terms of other countries, is because there was a congressional charter signed in 1863 passed by Congress, signed by President Abraham Lincoln. And it said, all right, you eminent scientists, you go ahead and have this organization of eminent scientists, but we want you to provide, when asked, advice to the government on matters of science and art. Those are the exact words. Now, art actually referred more to technology, engineering kind of things. And one of the very first activities that this academy undertook was to figure out how to make a compass work in the ironclad warship during the Civil War. They were successful in that. One of their later projects recommended in the late 19th century that the U.S. go over totally to a metric system, and that, of course, has not been quite so successful. In World War I, the need for the advice from the academy sort of mushroomed, and so it set up an operating arm, the National Research Council, under which my committee and others operate, and expanded the expertise that it would bring to bear from just beyond those people who were actually elected to this honorific society. But I do want to say that also part of our charter is to provide our advice pro bono. And the people who have organized this workshop, chaired by David Rubin, and you'll be seeing them, they're going to be moderating the sessions, have donated really an extensive amount of time to working to put together what we think will be a very interesting and productive workshop that will help our sponsor agencies figure out where to go next. I will end there, except I do want to give a thanks to Nancy Kirkendall, who's sitting right there, who is a senior program officer with Senstat. She is the staff member who has organized this. Agnes Gaskin, whom you saw when you came in and whom you will be seeing today, is shepherding you in terms of logistical arrangements, and other Senstat staff are helping as well. This is a public workshop. There will be it is being transcribed. It's actually being video graphed here. There will be a summary report prepared by Rose Lee and Associates. So we ask that when you discuss things, and we ask all moderators, remind people, go to the microphone, say your name, and so that we can make it possible for those who are going to be reading the transcript and seeing the video to know who's talking about what. Again, welcome. I look forward to a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce my dear friend and colleague for many years, Marie Bernard, who is Deputy Director of the National Institute on Aging, to give her perspective.
Thank you, David. Well, I want to join David and Connie in welcoming you this morning. I represent the National Institutes of Health, in particular the National Institute on Aging, the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, and the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. We've collaborated in this endeavor, and I in particular want to acknowledge our colleagues there, Dr. Deborah Ulster, who's the Deputy Director of the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research, Dr. Emmeline Edwards, who's the Director of the Division of Extramural Activities in the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. In particular, we're indebted to Dr. Liz Nielsen from the National Institute on Aging, who's represented us very ably in this collaboration. I'd also like to express thanks to all of the members of the steering committee and our NAS colleagues. Today's meeting really is a culmination of almost a 2-year process, which began with NEA forging a partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services to explore ways of strengthening arts research on human development. One of the first things that the multi-agency task force identified as a need was exploring through a systematic literature review and gap analysis those things that are necessary in priority areas for research. So in meetings between NIA and NEA initially, and then the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research, OBSSR, and National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, NCCAM, we like acronyms at NIH. We agreed that a focused National Academies-led effort to review the literature would be very helpful as we move forward. So this meeting is going to focus on aging and life course development and how that intersects with the priorities for all three of these institutes and centers who are supporting this. Success will depend upon achieving three objectives. First, to develop effective interventions to maintain health and function and prevent or reduce the burden of age-related diseases, disorders, and disabilities. The second objective is to understand and develop strategies to enhance societal roles and interpersonal support for older adults, reduce social isolation, and prevent elder abuse. And the third objective is to increase awareness and promote adoption of interventions to improve the health and quality of life of older adults. It's a mutual interest for all three of the institutes who have been involved in working with NEA and NAS on this endeavor. Of particular interest in research is research incorporating arts activities as components of interventions to remediate or delay age-related cognitive decline or sensory motor impairments, examining the potential of specific arts activities and interventions to enhance quality of life in older adults, including those living in the community, those who are institutionalized, and those suffering from dementia or from critical illness at the end of life. We're interested in examining the potential of arts interventions to support healthy communities and encourage social engagement across generations. And we're interested in understanding the potential of the arts to impact other biomedical health outcomes. This would include gaining a better understanding of the psychological, neurobiological, physiological, and behavioral pathways through which any salubrious health effects of the arts arise. So we're very, very interested in the science. And we look forward to the discussions today to give us some actionable recommendations regarding ways in which we can build for the future. So again, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Marie. And next, I guess, Rocco, Rocco Landesman, we're delighted to have here. He is the director of the National Endowment for the Arts, and he'll say a few words about NEA's involvement.
Okay, thanks. I'm here today not just as an old guy who cares about his health and well-being, although I do. I am here as the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. As such, I've spent the last 3 years trying to embed the arts in every other federal agency. The cuckoo bird lays its eggs in other birds' nests, and I think of the arts as eggs that I'm leaving around Washington, D.C. to be raised by others. Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius was maybe the first cabinet secretary to accept an arts egg, and she called in reinforcements to help with the rearing. Today, I would like to especially thank the steering committee led by Dr. Dave Rubin, as well as the NEA's fellow sponsors of this workshop and the commission papers. NIH's Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, its National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, and of course, the National Academies and NIH's National Institute on Aging. Thank you again, Marie, and thanks also to people you've already thanked, Liz Nielsen, Deb Ulster, and Emmeline Edwards, who all served as members of the NEA's Interagency Task Force on the Arts and Human Development. And I'm very, very proud of this initiative, indeed. And thank you, Connie Citro, Nancy Kirkendall, and the staff of the Committee on National Statistics and the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education, as well as Judy Salerno from the Institute of Medicine. Finally, I also want to say that it's great that Helga and Tony Noyce are here. Their research was featured at the March 2011 convening that Secretary Sebelius and I co-convened and that led directly to today's workshop. I've long believed that we need to be explicit about the connection between the arts and the, for lack of a better phrase, the real world. The arts do not exist in vacuums, and their potency does not evaporate when you leave the performance hall or gallery. I know how art has worked on me over the years, and I'm eager to see our joint work go forward to quantify and analyze in exactly what ways. Much of the work I'm most excited about during my tenure has to do with the arts and human development. I'm very, very proud of that brochure that's sitting over there on the table indeed. None of that would have been possible without the NEA's secret weapon, our Director of Research and Analysis, Sunil Iyengar. So let me turn things over to Sunil so we can hear from him and then get going on the important work we have ahead of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rocco. In the last few years, the National Endowment for the Arts has placed a heightened emphasis on evidence-based decision-making through the Office of Research and Analysis, where I'm fortunate to serve as director. Under the leadership of the NEA chairman and senior deputy chairman, and through the hard work and ingenuity of NEA staff, we've upped the level of responsibility and rigor that we take on as a federal agency whose mission is to advance artistic excellence, creativity, and innovation for the benefit of individuals and communities. This mission coincides with a national moment, one with dramatic points of convergence, when we as researchers, practitioners, and policymakers are increasingly seeing the arts appeal to a broad range of sectors as catalytic for their own goals. Part of that may be the cuckoo nest effect, but it also seems to be organically happening. You heard just now from Marie about arts-related research topics that align with the National Institute on Aging's core strategic objectives. Lately, there's been the same type of recognition of the arts' potential role in achieving outcomes elsewhere in health and in education and economic and community development. As a result, there's more of a push to figure out what we know and how well we know it, and to what extent can any findings be replicated. One of the test beds we have for understanding the strength of these connections is the partnership you heard about that we forged with 14 other federal agencies and departments called the Interagency Task Force on the Arts and Human Development. It strives to consolidate research and evidence-based practices about how the arts work in advancing health and well-being outcomes for individuals across the lifespan. When we formed this group late last year, I went on a listening tour to meet with many of the task force members. What emerged from those conversations, as you heard from Marie, was a shared commitment by three members in particular: the National Institute on Aging, the NIH's Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, and the NIH's National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, to focus on one particular segment of the lifespan, older Americans, to identify research gaps and opportunities that can drive future decisions about how these agencies and other funders invest in promising arts-related research that can seed interventions to improve quality of life for this growing population. There was another reason to focus first on this age group and its attendant research questions, and that has to do with the substantial body of work already devoted to this topic, partly represented by our speakers today. It's been more than 6 years since the late Dr. Gene Cohen published the final results of his Creativity and Aging study, sponsored by the NEA and NIH. This was a landmark study of the arts' potential impacts on older adults, but in the public eye, it stands alone and solitary, begging for companionship. We wanted to dig deeper and find that evidence and see how we could address limitations inherent in past research approaches. I want to take just a minute or two to review the research questions before you and invite you to think about three additional cross-cutting issues. As you can see from the agenda, and as will grow apparent from today's presentations, we want your best thinking on what the state of evidence suggests for future research into questions such as the relationship of arts programs and interventions to psychological well-being, cognitive, sensory, and motor skills function in older adults and the underlying neural processes, comparative benefits and weaknesses of arts therapies over other behavioral and/or drug interventions for older adults who are experiencing declines in cognitive, sensory, or motor function, cost-effectiveness analysis of such programs in comparison with other healthcare interventions for this population, and the relationship of aesthetics and design factors to health and quality of life-related outcomes of older adults in long-term care and assisted living facilities. And if that's not enough, I just want to say that in addition to these targeted questions, I invite you to think as steering committee members, speakers, and general participants about three overarching issues. One, for each of the types of impacts we are addressing, have we sufficiently established a model for the mechanism of action by which arts participation may have long-term effects on older Americans? What are those pathways, and what are their implications for optimizing dosage, adherence to treatment, caregiver requirements, and clinical or non-clinical settings? Two, an obvious shortcoming of much of the research in this field is the lack of large randomized controlled trials to understand the unique contributions of the arts to these outcomes. A classic question is, to what degree is the efficacy of arts therapy attributable simply to the socialization that might have occurred with other types of behavioral interventions? But before we get too fired up about RCTs, it behooves us to ask, Are there any innovative study designs or approaches that can be utilized in lieu of randomized controlled trials? Unlike clinical trials to test a pill or a medical device, a study of an arts intervention needs to account for a complex web of additional variables, such as levels of prior exposure to the arts activity, training and qualifications of the provider, and self-reported responses to the therapy, all factors that might be better suited for another kind of study design, perhaps an observational or quasi-experimental model. 3, this one's equally a challenge to us workshop sponsors and to funders not only sitting in this room, and that is assuming that we can decide on some next steps for research in this exciting area and the kinds of research questions, approaches, and expertise we would invite, then what kind of capacity building might be needed for such researchers? What strategies might be funded to raise the technical competency of the field across arts practitioners, therapists, and the biomedical and behavioral research community to take this research to the next appropriate level? I want to end by reminding you that ultimately this is what today's workshop is all about, generating fresh ideas that can be acted upon by my fellow sponsors, the NEA, foundations, and other public and private funders who seek to improve our nation's understanding of the arts' potential in advancing health and well-being outcomes for older Americans. To that end, the NEA and its co-sponsors will circulate a workshop report from today's deliberations within the next few months. Let me close by thanking Ellen Grantham and the Office of Research Analysis for helping to prepare this event for us today, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks to each of you, and we're doing something that's very rare in my world. We're staying on time. And so I would like to move directly into the next session. As Sunil has mentioned, that the day is organized around 5 real issues. The first is the relationship of arts programs and intervention to psychological well-being, cognitive, sensory, and motor skill function in older adults, and the underlying neural processes. For this session, Art Kramer, who is the director of the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology, and the Swanlund Chair in Psychology and Neurosciences at the University of Illinois, and a lifelong researcher in cognitive and brain plasticity across the lifespan, is going to moderate. I spent dinner with Art last night, and he's a very interesting guy. We're talking about living in the caves, but in any event, I'm going to turn this over to Art and the other panelists.